You know, if there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than would you rather have sex with a goat but nobody would know, or not have sex with a goat but everybody believes that you did? Well, that question would have to be, Mark, is the tiny Voigtländer Ultron 40mm f2 SL2 itself the greatest of all time pancake lens for the Nikon F mount? Or is this goat just a horny bleating sheep of a lens pulling the wool over all of our eyes? Well, today we're going to try and answer that question. Greatest of all time, well, that's a bold claim and not one I'm prepared to make just yet, but don't worry, even if it is, this is one goat I will not be having sex with. No, this lens has its place here on my Nikon FE, where it brings a compact air of analog cool to this already quite discreet camera. So why does this lens exist? There are plenty of great 35mm and 50mm lenses out there already for the Nikon F mount, and most of them come in a lot cheaper than this one. But as of writing, Nikon only has one 40mm prime lens for F mount, and that's a DX lens, so it won't cover full frame. So in a sense, this little optic already fills a unique position in the lens lineup, being in that Goldilocks zone of not too wide and not too narrow. I've mentioned before that I'm a bit skeptical about the claim that any particular focal length mirrors the field of view of a human eye. The way we see the world is more than just a sensor on the back of our eyes, and our perception is muddied by that bucket of slop between our ears called our brains. That said, for me, 40mm is a comfortable middle ground, and it does allow me to take shots and avoid the distortion of wide angles while still allowing me to include some of the environment. As the SL2 name suggests, this isn't the first version of the lens, and it's not the last either, with a newer S version that I'll talk about a bit later. That means you won't likely find this particular version new, and maybe that's not such a bad thing, given that secondhand you're already going to pay at least 500 Australian dollars for it. Yes, this is not a cheap lens, but that's par for the course for a Voigtländer, which of course is really just Cassina under another label, but since Cassina also makes Zeiss glass too, we can probably conveniently forget their somewhat inauspicious history and just hold the lens in our hands, because this is not a bargain basement lens by any means. This thing oozes quality. It's not that light, coming in at 198 grams, but that makes sense when you hold it. It's a dense, perfectly machined block of metal and glass. At 24mm in height, it's less than an inch long and probably contributes to that surprising sense of heft that you feel when you hold it in your hand. That 24cm is without this dinky little lens hood that also acts as a filter thread adapter. It protects the lens from light and potential bumps, but it also gives you the chance to use either 52mm filters, which has always been the Nikon standard for smaller lenses, or 39mm. It even comes with a 39mm close-up filter too, and more of that in a moment. The fact is that this is a lens that you just want to caress, coddle, and whisper sweet nothings to as you gently click its metal mount into the flange of your precious Nikon, or Canon or Pentax, because they did make it for other mounts too. So this is one of those lenses whose size and build quality add a lot of allure to the photographic process. But how does it fare actually taking pictures? How does it handle, and can you get a decent image from it? Well, to test that out, I was walking the streets of Dapoqiao in Shanghai, China, with my Nikon FE and a fresh roll of Kodak Pro Image 100. half the roll down, and what did you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below as to whether you think that the results are worth the words about the Voigtländer 40mm f2 Ultron SL2. And what about that name Ultron? The Marvel moniker suggests supervillain, but to me, it just screams precision machined perfection.
It's time for some mind games.
I've already talked about the build quality, but what's surprising about this lens is just how easy it is to use for its size. The 120-degree focus throw is smooth, damper than my nana's knickers at a Tom Jones concert. It's easy and precise to focus, has a perfectly calibrated hard infinity stop, and the aperture ring clicks confidently and smoothly without any wobble or rattle. It's a joy to use. To further reinforce that sense of quality, the markings on the lens are engraved rather than printed and provide everything you need to judge your depth of focus if you're looking at just setting it to a small aperture and fixing the focus point to get everything from infinity to about 0.4 meters sharp. I don't do that, and why would I, since I enjoy using that focus ring so much? As I mentioned, there is a newer S version of the lens that trades the sleek contemporary design for a more chunky vintage look. The image quality is purportedly similar, although the close-up performance is improved, removing the need for a close-up lens, and it has those bunny ears aperture prongs for those old non-aperture coupled Nikon F cameras. Great, but with a bigger and heavier body, you lose most of the other advantages. The bigger size might make the newer lens a bit easier to handle, but in fact, I feel nothing but sparks of Marie Kondo joy when I finger this 40mm. It means I would never trade up to the size of the S version. But I digress. Let's finish this roll of film and then come back to talk about image quality. guess it's a street of sorts. Let's explore. I've got to be able to make something of that, haven't I? Boring Men's Circle Studio sounds like home. Can I integrate those reflections in an interesting way? That's where a zoom lens would be useful. Maybe. Oh, yes. Just do that. I feel like I'm wasting film, could be better on the phone. I think I've got one shot left, 136. The trick, I think, then, is to work it. Walking on the grass. I've got one more. So there you go, one roll of Kodak Pro Image 100 taken on different days in Shanghai, but all done during a couple of brief walks through the city. If that sounds a bit like an excuse for why the photos are kind of random, then maybe it is. But with this lens, surely you have a better reason than ever to say that photography is all about that process and that the results are simply the byproduct of that. Look, there probably isn't much point in trying to do any comparison with other lenses, but let's get a bit forensic on this little fella just to see where its optimum settings sit. Firstly, sharpness, and no surprise that on a lens like this there are compromises. Center sharpness is just okay at f2 and then clears up significantly at f2.8. By the time you hit f4, you're in peak territory. And once you get down to f11, diffraction starts to take its toll. f16 isn't very usable, and I'd only use this lens at f22 if I absolutely had to. The corners are surprisingly good though, and I think that surprise is really just because I'm used to seeing and pixel peeping at the corners of vintage lenses, which do suffer a lot from spherical aberration and struggle to tighten up those corners. While here the corners are definitely soft at f2, the lack of contrast and darkness due to fall off are more noticeable, and by f2.8 you're already getting quite similar performance to the center. Overall, this lens is much sharper than a vintage lens, but it's certainly not at the level that we're starting to expect from modern mirrorless standard primes. But then, have you checked out the size of those lately? The 50mm f1.8 Nikon Z lens has a great reputation, but it's a beast. Close-up performance isn't mind-blowing with the Voigtländer. The closest that you can get is 0.38 meters, and again it's a bit soft at f2 but clears up again by f2.8. I find that this gets me close enough most of the time, but I'm used to the 1 meter focusing distance of a rangefinder, and I find this totally adequate. If close-up is your thing though, it does come with this neat little close-up lens that gets you a 1:4 reproduction ratio, which still isn't quite macro, but it's about as close as you need for any non-macro lens. The main selling point is that it doesn't add any real size to your kit, and I can't see any loss in image quality with it. That said, carrying a close-up lens and screwing or unscrewing it all the time is a faff, particularly since with the close-up lens you do lose infinity focus. No surprises when it comes to vignetting on a lens this small. It's dark in the corners at f2, but clears up very quickly as you go down the aperture range. Point my phone torch in its direction and you can see that yes, there is flare. It's not that disturbing as you do keep some contrast and color even as you point it directly into the light. But what you do get is this unique red halo around your light source. Now I normally hate flare, but this is actually quite cool. And hey, maybe this could be your way of recreating that sinister effect you get when you shoot motion picture film with the anti-halation layer removed. Chromatic aberration is there, but it's minor and easily correctable. Again, a good performance given the size of this lens. Finally, distortion, and while this real-world photo shows it is quite evident, worse actually than some reviews I've read about this lens have made it out to be. So maybe they have some lens profiles going on. Regardless, it's definitely easily correctable. I just add +7 in Lightroom. Look, this lens is not a complex design with 6 elements in 5 groups. The inclusion of aspherical and ED elements probably does something to help corner fall off in sharpness, perhaps at the expense of some of that 3D pop pixie dust that, whether real or imagined, definitely seems to be a characteristic of low element Voigtländer lenses. This lens is not perfect, but it does have that something. It's probably most noticeable on digital rather than film, where there's a quality to the color rendering that is just a bit magical. The colors definitely pop on the Pro Image 100 as well, but that might be the emulsion itself. But certainly the reds and yellows in this image do stand out. Whether that's enough to justify the cost of this lens, well, you be the judge. So there you have it, the 40mm Voigtländer F2 Ultron SL2. If I'm to pick 6 gems from just one roll of film, then let these be them. Though they're still more cubic zirconia than diamonds in the rough. Still, like I said, this lens is as much about the process of shooting as it is about the results, and certainly, other than the limitations of using a manual focus prime lens, if the results aren't perfect, it's due to the photographer, not the equipment. So let me know your thoughts. Do you have a favorite among these 6 photos? Have you used this lens, or do you have the newer S version? Is the cost and optical compromise of the small factor worth it in your eyes, or would I be better just lugging around a larger lens? Of course, if you have the Z mount camera, then you have the inexpensive 40mm Z as an option. But I don't have that one yet, so can't compare. Regardless, this is the only one that's backwards compatible with most Nikon cameras, going as far back as the 1980s. In fact, on Nikon SLRs, your choices are going to be limited anyway. Non-Nikon lenses just don't adapt well to the Nikon F mount, with its atypically long flange distance, not leaving any room for an adapter. This lens isn't the sharpest in the shed, but its size and rather special rendering make it unique among the lineup of compatible glass. And most importantly, it's really your only option if you're looking for a tiny 40mm lens that manages to combine modern coatings and elements, but still with a bit of unclinical character. It manages to be a non-Nikon lens without being Sigma and Tamron, if you know what I mean. For me, what makes this lens special is that size and handling. It's a pleasure to use and it looks beautiful on my Nikon FE. But it's even more stunning on the even smaller Nikon FG. In that sense, this really is the GOAT. Though, I do have to reinforce that my attraction to it is purely photographic, okay? Later.